Hey, Matt Bromiley. Thanks for coming back to chat
What's up?
Intel with us again. I had a lot of fun last time and even learned a thing or two.
Hey, I gotta say, I had an awesome time. I really appreciate being able to jump on here and talk about some of the things that are coming up in our community Slack. So thank you for having me.
For anybody that missed last week, this is a new segment on the show that we're trying out, which was inspired by the Intel channel recently created on the LimaCharlie community Slack. There's just so much great information being posted there. I wanted to bubble it up, and Matt was kind enough to step up and help us go deep on it.
Yeah, I think it's a really really cool way to kind of represent and speak to the things that are concerning our LimaCharlie community. The Intel and detections chat, some of the places where the most chatter happens, if you will, is a really really cool location because it is a spot where folks are, or I should say, it's a spot where LimaCharlie users are talking about the things that matter to them. They're talking about it's not a constant stream of every single threat that's out there. It's very targeted, focused discussions about here's the things that I'm concerned about or that my customers are concerned about. And again, it's a huge advantage to be able to have that type of chatter going on in our channel. So if you're not in our community Slack, please by all means join it. For those who are in there, a huge hat tip for keeping the conversation going.
Awesome. The first one I got here is Menlo Labs has uncovered an unknown threat actor that's running an evasive threat campaign, which is being distributed via Discord and is targeting government entities. Apparently, the threat actors are using a compromised domain of a nonprofit as a command and control, or C2, to deliver a secondary payload. What do you know about the infection chain here, and why would they choose a nonprofit to distribute additional malware?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting case. This came up, I think this is Pure Cryptor, which is kind of the piece of malware, the downloader, if you will, the initial downloader, which then kind of subsequently leads to the downloading of another payload. So for anyone who's curious about kind of the way that infection chain takes place, in some cases, an adversary will send you what is the malware, if you will. And in other cases, they'll end up sending a first file that then downloads a secondary file. And believe it or not, sometimes it's just really good business operations. So you can have an initial downloader, and then you can change the configuration on the back end of what the secondary downloader does or is. So that way you can either distribute multiple pieces of ransomware, or you can use the same initial downloader for multiple campaigns. This particular one, which is making use of Discord, and then concurrently making uses of non-profit sites, I think is an interesting approach. So adversaries will typically try to blend into the noise as much as they possibly can, and taking over a site that folks may either think is legitimate, meaning you don't feel that bad connecting to like a .org, because you're used to them being, nonprofit sites. They're very, very low key. They usually focus on charitable contributions and things like that. You're not really, scanning your network traffic. For our network defenders out there, you're not scanning your network traffic and looking for malicious nonprofit websites and stuff. So it's a really easy way to hide your C2 amongst the noise, number one. And I think the use of Discord as a potential kind of delivery mechanism there goes in the exact same vein. If I want to blend in and I want to hide my malware delivery inside of seemingly innocuous traffic, I'm going to use Discord, right? If the organization uses Discord, the traffic might be encrypted, but discord.com popping up in my network logs is not a bad thing necessarily. So it's a really, really good way to kind of blend in, number one, and it's also a way to target those particular types of victims. The fact that we've seen, or I should say the fact that Menlo saw the targeting of government entities was done primarily because who is likely visiting those types of websites, what types of people, what types of companies, what types of traffic would you expect to go there. It's another way of blending into the noise of hosting your malware or some sort of potential malicious link on a site that your target users are likely going to. I would say in the same vein, you see a lot of this happen on kind of normal public websites as well. Meaning, if I've got a population of users who I know commonly go to a particular search engine, I might try to hijack those search results. Or if I know everyone inside of there utilizes some sort of third-party software, I might turn that into a watering hole style attack instead. So I don't think it's, if we kind of swap out the different pieces of this here, Chris, I don't know if it's something that is necessarily new for threat actors, but a huge hat tip to the folks over at Menlo for identifying this and calling it out as well, because it's, often very easy to hide under the radar for the reasons I just kind of laid out.
And just to be clear, like the initial attack vector would be like dropping a link in a Discord channel and hoping one of the targets clicks on it.
The way that I read this, and I definitely, if anyone who's listening to us may have interpreted this one a little bit differently, I read it as the malware is being distributed via Discord, which makes me think that it might be kind of hosted in Discord, for lack of a better term. And kind of reading through Menlo Security's post, they talk about, Discord was used to host the payload, and a link to the payload is sent via email. So what I think is happening is I think the initial stager is hosted in Discord. There's probably some sort of publicly shareable link you can generate from a file, and that's where it's sitting. So it looks like the user is downloading a file from Discord, which, again, in a lot of environments is probably not that suspicious.
And not going to look funny in the logs or anything like that.
Yeah, well, that, if you can even read it. The other thing, too, is you might have a piece of malware being downloaded inside of a encrypted Discord tunnel. So who knows?
All right. Well, next up, we got TA569 is apparently a prolific threat actor who's been deploying website injections that run a JavaScript payload known as sock Goldish. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. But recently, researchers have noticed an uptick in activity and some variation in the deployment. What can you tell us about sock Goldish, and what do these kinds of changes in behavior generally signal to the researchers that are watching someone like this?
Yeah, so for anyone who's curious, TA569, the TA beginning of any threat group, I believe it stands for threat actor, I think, and that's often a Proofpoint association. So again, a huge props to the folks over at Proofpoint for publishing and announcing this here for us. And it was an article that came out earlier this week, I should say late February 2023. The interesting thing about this one here is exactly as you described. It is a JavaScript-based injection, and what's happening is some folks might be familiar with kind of the fake browser updates injections that we've seen in the past. This one works very, very similar. This one works when a user visits a site that's been compromised by a TA569 injection. Could be through a link, could be through an email, could be through a website redirect or something along those lines. And what happens is a lure, if you will, is provided to the right types of users. So the adversaries will typically configure certain criteria ahead of time that they want the victims to meet. This is very, very common. A lot of times malware will ignore or focus on like language packs, for example. So it's really easy to say, hey, I want these characteristics of someone's browser window to match. I shouldn't say nice, but the reason for that is anyone who's not a target will not see the lure. They will not kind of see it. It will just be a regular website to them. Anyone who is a target, it will look a little bit different. It's another way to kind of weed out someone who's not a target getting infected, or perhaps getting rid of researchers.
Yeah, I was going to say it probably lowers the probability of somebody identifying them if you're showing it to less people.
Yeah, and it's like they'll likely build like allow and deny lists around like sandboxing and different researcher domains and kind of default browser activity and things like that. But what it does is that kind of kicks off that initial, infection chain of dropping in that lure, and then, we get into JavaScript execution. We're pushing files down to the system, asking the user to run things if need be. And then next thing you know, I've turned kind of malicious JavaScript in the browser into an on-disk artifact that's now pinging back home, reaching to a C2 and things like that. You asked an interesting part of this question too, Chris, which is like, what are the changes in behavior signal to researchers? I'm a firm believer that watching how and why adversaries do and what they do is a huge indicator of what's working and what isn't working. And I think that what we're seeing when we see adversaries either change campaigns or modify their campaigns a little bit, they either are saying, hey, we tried this in the past and it worked, so we're going to just strengthen it and make it better. Or the thing that we were doing before doesn't work as much, so I'm going to try something new instead. The easiest kind of example I can think for this is something like a spear phishing campaign. Let's say you had 10 sample spear phishes in your head. One of them is, hey, click these links. Number 2 is, add me on LinkedIn. Number 3 is, please open this invoice, whatever they may be, right? Well, of those 10, some of them are going to be wildly successful. Some of them are going to just be absolute duds. So your behavior is naturally going to lean towards the ones that are most successful, and those may end up being your priority, guess what? For security researchers, those also become your hallmarks. They also become a sign that you've got a particular type of behavior, or you've got a particular type of activity you like to go after, or a tactic or a technique, because that's what your behavior is telling you as this is successful. So it might be a combination of the two. It might also be, someone's got a crazy idea, or there was a recent vulnerability or injection, code injection opportunity that came up or something like that. But a lot of times it's adversaries chasing the behaviors that work or strengthening the behaviors that have worked for them.
It sounds very much like the tactics a startup takes when they're trying new products or marketing campaigns and stuff like that. It's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the same wash, rinse, and repeat process that we all go through. We all know it, right? We get the product from wherever, we try it out, and if we like it, we keep it, and if we don't, we move on. We try something else. So, bad guys are humans too. We have the same behavior, same behavioral traits. It's just they're using theirs for bad purposes.
Different morals. They say TA569 is likely an access broker. I've heard this is a whole dark industry within the dark side of the web in itself. What do you know about access brokers in the scene there? Are they just selling access to compromised systems?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Anytime you hear about an access broker, one thing that you need to keep in mind is the overall kind of infection chain that an organization goes through, right? So if I think about the adversarial life cycle, or you can think about MITRE's attack matrix, usually left to right, where you start with kind of initially breaking into an organization, okay, all the way to actually achieving the objectives that you wanted to achieve. So let's say hypothetically, ransomware was the topic of discussion here. There is a point in time where someone breaks into an organization, or breaks into a victim, gets that initial foothold, if you will. There's a point in time where they elevate credentials. There's a point in time where they move laterally. There's a point in time where they encrypt the data. Then there's a point in time where they demand a ransom, and that negotiation process that happens. There's all sorts of, from a coding perspective, there's little breakpoints. I was going to say breakpoints that you could drop in, and that's what things like access brokers and malicious types of parties like that are doing, or nefarious parties, I should say, is they've inserted a breakpoint, and they've said, okay, guess what? We've got this amazingly capable piece of malware that gets a foothold in an environment, right? We're really good at building footholds. We're not very good at everything else after that, right? We're great at JavaScript. We're horrible at escalating privileges and stuff like that. So what you'll see happen in cases like this, especially when you've got things like access brokers, is they will capitalize on their strengths pretty much. And it's weird how much human behavior we're tackling here, but that's exactly what it is. They'll say, this is what we're really good at. So tell you what, rather than, and Chris, it's numbers, right? Rather than compromise 20 environments and hopefully we can infiltrate and extract data from 20 of them, what if I got really smart and I just compromised 1,000? And I sold the access to those 1,000 because that's my strength. That's what I focus on. And guess what? It's exactly what they're doing. It's exactly what they're doing is they are focusing on their strengths and then selling off access as soon as they gain access. I think it's also a little bit of risk transference as well. If you get an initial foothold in an organization and you sell that off to someone, you kind of offload in a weird way the idea that the attack will ever be successful. Right? It's kind of like if I sell you a book and I say, hey, go read this thing. I wrote this great book. I want you to go read this thing, have fun with it. Once you buy it and walk away, especially if you've paid me via an anonymous forum or some anonymous medium or something like that, I'm not responsible for whether or not you actually read it. There could have been life-changing advice in there, but if you didn't read it, that's not my problem anymore. I wrote it and you bought it. We're done. So lots of interesting approaches. I will say the other side of that, let's go back to that ransomware example. You see this happen in other cases, and a lot of folks are very familiar with this as well. You'll see adversaries compromise environments and get all the way to the ransom stage and then hand the ransom stage off to a third party who does the negotiation on their behalf. And they take a small cut out of it. And it's the exact same approach. It's breaking up a piece of an intrusion and selling it off to the people who are better qualified for it. Or it's recognizing that it's not your strength and then giving someone a cut of what your overall, what your end money might be. Believe it or not, it's a business process. I mean, it's supply chain management.
Yeah, it sounds so
It's a
much
business
like the way
process.
companies run, just with like bad morals.
I mean, let's be clear. Malware and the work. I was going to say the work of maliciously getting intruding into an environment and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's an entire
Yeah.
industry. It really is, and that's one thing for folks to. I like to say for security researchers to remember is that you're facing an industry, and a lot of times we get very personal, and a lot of folks, when you think of like a malware developer, I think a lot of folks still resort back to that kind of like hoodie in a dark basement kind of thing, like, oh, there's someone who, just knows computer code really well, but, is probably has all the hallmarks and traits of every single stereotype we've ever seen. That may be true in some cases, but in many, many other cases, someone's figured out a way to monetize and commoditize nearly every single step of this, and they're doing it very, very well. And instead of having a whole team of people with a bunch of specialties, you might say, I'm running a malware shop, right? I'm going to hire 20 of the best Windows developers I can find.
And we're going to have daily stand-ups, and we're going to do 2-week sprints, and we've got milestones.
And that's all we're going to do. We're going to have sprints. I mean, if anyone wants to follow up on this one, there was a very, very prolific financially motivated group back in the day, a few years ago, Fin7, big on credit card theft and that kind of stuff. One of Fin7's, I think it was their Jira ticketing system that actually got infiltrated and got kind of disclosed and leaked out to everyone. But they had a fully capable ticketing system. They kept track of customers, of issues. They kept track of all sorts of technical concerns they were going through. I mean, it was a fully functioning organization. And the interesting thing about that is you look at the revenues of some of these groups and you're like, well, the only way you get to that level of revenue is via organization. Sure. I mean, this is not some sort of like crypto heist where all of a sudden you're worth $1 billion. This is a targeted, very technical approach. This is focused. This is making use of various footholds you've got. This is finding the right technology. This is building solutions to get around EDR and evade defenses and stuff like that. I mean, the list of things that some of these organizations will go through to stay maintained and to stay profitable is the same as any other company that's out there.
Wow, that's one I'm going to go check out the Fin7 docs.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
So one thing I found interesting in this week's stream, which I didn't initially think of as a threat, but realized it was when I thought about it, was an article someone posted about the complexity and volume of cyber attacks and how they lead to analyst burnout. I come to security from the software side of things, which can definitely not be healthy in its own way. But I've heard over and over again about how stressful the work for analysts can be. I imagine that tired and burned out analysts are more prone to mistakes, and therein lies the threat.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, and also it's a very big concern as well. I think the biggest takeaway here, the first takeaway is, and I said this in the very beginning here, that our detections channel and the intel discussions we have at LimaCharlie, they're not any sort of like just constant stream of intelligence that comes through, right? They're curated discussions based on what our users are seeing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of organizations out there that are just bringing in streams of data. And I'm not talking like, once every 24 hours, there's a nice, beautiful templated email for you. I'm talking just raw data flowing in, or I'll go the other side of it, and environments where detection rules, I won't mention LimaCharlie's detection systems because I think we curate and have a really good setup for ours. But in some environments, analysts are left with just, thousands and thousands of things to deal with every single day. And I think a lot of it comes down to some pure psychology, which is you can't continually try to push a boulder uphill and never feel let down and never feel like you just can't do it, especially if every time you push, the hill just gets a little bit bigger. You know what I mean? And I used to work with some analysts who at one point in time had done an amazing integration in bringing all sorts of detection rules and detection engineering capabilities and everything into what they were doing. And they were super proud of what they had built. And about a week later, half of the detection rules that they had brought in were invalidated. because the adversaries had changed their tactics and techniques. Now, with enough engineering, you can just overcome that and just bring, import the new rules and stuff. But let's go the other route. And let's just say, as an analyst, as a security team, you get some money, you build a program, your program is focused on the goals of XYZ and ABC, and you go and you achieve this thing. And then you learn that 6 months ago, the adversaries changed all of their stuff around, right? They changed their tactics and techniques. They changed their approach. The thing that you thought was super critical, either no longer is, or something that you were very dismissive of is now a huge deal. A personal example of this, I remember in 2015, 2016, getting a call from some organizations who had been hit with ransomware. And they were kind of like, hey, I'm getting hit with ransomware. And I was like, what's the ransom? They're like $500. And I'm like, cool, pay it or restore from a backup. Yeah. It wasn't this multi-billion-dollar thing that we deal with now. But let's say I had built a security program around, it's never going to happen to us. One person, one track mind, that may be an easy thing to come back with. But let's say I hired a team of analysts and I trained them all to think like I did and take the same approach that I did. And now we've got this obsolete or outdated security program. So how do I recover from that? I simply just give my analysts as much data as I possibly can. And I just overload them and I turn on every single point of telemetry I can. And we get all the things from all the systems and we dump it all into a big bucket. And I say, you're analysts, you're trained, you're experienced. Go into that bucket and find me evil. And by the way, every time they remove a drop of water from that bucket, I add another gallon in. So what happens there is it's really, really easy to get into, I call it analysis paralysis, but you get into that stage of you can't beat down the amount of volume that's coming in. And I think what's happened there is it does create a very stressful work environment. It really upsets kind of the work-life balance of things. A lot of analysts also feel like, because the alerts never end or because the telemetry never ends or the intel never ends, their job never ends. So it's very, very common.
And then you throw like a log4j or something on top of that just to keep it interesting.
That's exactly it. So there was someone, and I don't know who it was. If anyone who hears this and it was you, reach out to us. We'd love to know. We'd love to hear about that. There was someone who took a vacation the day before log4j dropped. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it was probably one of those like, I've had this vacation planned forever. We bought the tickets. We got the resort. We did the thing. Like it was this huge, long plan that they had. And they've been waiting and their mind was set. Boom. Log4j drops. That individual is the critical link in making all those things happen. So once that happens to you, and I've worked with plenty of people who have been stuck in this problem as well. Once that happens to you, it makes the next vacation really hard to plan.
Right. You almost have a kind of post-traumatic stress issue with it. Yeah.
You've got this kind of vacation planning fear where you're like, well, what if it happens again? Now I will go as far as to say an organization that can only get themselves out of can only fix a flat tire with one person out of a staff of whatever, there's another issue to be fixed, right? But more importantly, what that does to the analyst's mind and to the analyst's brain is very, very tough. And let me be very clear for everyone too. It's not like, hey, we need you to delay or postpone your vacation. Can you come back in at 9 a.m. tomorrow, right? When a critical information security vulnerability drops, it is war rooms. It is overnights. It's 24/7s because the adversaries move that fast. Because their whole goal is infiltrate and make money. Your whole goal is to protect an organization of hundreds of thousands. Unfortunately, where those goals collide is great for the adversary and horrible for someone who is looking for that, in that moment, that work-life balance. But I will say, I think that a lot of it has changed over the years. I think I know this from personal experience. A ton of incident responders and folks I've worked with now, they're much less afraid to take vacations. They're much less afraid and much more confident in handing off the reins to someone else and things like that. And I would say that 10 years ago, if you were like, hey, I'm going to take a vacation and you worked in incident response, there was almost a weird kind of frown upon. But I'm glad that I think that culture is mostly, for the most part, gone, if not heavily
And
faded away.
yeah, and I think that's
So
a
a huge shout out to anyone out there who is kind of, on the cusp of, I really need a break right here. By all means, take it for yourself. You have no idea how important your mental health is.
yeah, and I was just going to say, I think that's like a sign of maturity in the industry as well, which we're seeing like it's moving towards more of an engineering practice where there isn't this one magic key person who's going to swoop in with their magical bash scripts and fix all the things. It's you've got a proper structure and proper systems.
And admittedly, the building of in-house security teams and security capabilities helps out with that a little bit. But then also having the ability to rely on third parties as well. I mean, Chris, you and I both know a lot of folks we have at LimaCharlie are MSSPs and MDR providers, and being able to kind of say, you know what, my team I need to have the flexibility to have my team keep themselves sane. So we're going to sign up with one of these managed services, and we're going to utilize that to help keep us sane and help keep, an extra pair of eyes on glass and things like that. And it can be a huge benefit for some organizations. It's not just outsourcing capabilities or outsourcing technical acumen and things like that. It's also saying to your team, hey, I've outsourced the fire alarm so that you don't have to pull it all the time. And I think that's a very reassuring thing for some organizations to be in, because it removes that sense of, if you're not here, something bad's going to happen. And it turns it into, if you're not here, we'll be okay. And then that should go a step further, which says it's not that we don't need you, but it's like, take your time. Take your time to go do what you need to do. Take your time to go reset your brain, decompress, whatever it is, and then come back to us fully charged. And I think there's been some really interesting studies out there that have kind of indicated what happens when you focus on kind of work-life balance and mental health and things like that. And, long story short, I believe everything I've ever read has been positive about giving people a chance to kind of be themselves and build the type of life they want to have.
That's a long-term strategy for success, for sure.
Yes.
All right. The last one I want to cover today is this emerging post-exploitation framework, Exfiltrator 22 or X22.
Oh, this one.
They think it's coming out of Southeast Asia, apparently utilizing very advanced anti-analysis and defensive evasion techniques. Have you had a chance to look at this one?
I have. Yeah, I've read some articles about this one. Exfiltrator 22 with a huge, I think they have an Instagram account.
Well, yeah, I saw they put an ad on YouTube. Like, this is where, this is an industry with companies, effectively operating as companies. Yeah.
I tell you, if you ever want to disrupt, if you ever want to find a way to break into and disrupt the kind of like Cobalt Strike monopoly that's out there and that kind of stuff, that what used to be, go and publicize your post-exploitation kit as if it's some sort of like celebrity or something like that. I've had a chance to dig into this one. In fact, I've already done some testing against this one too. So for anyone out there, we'll have some blog posts coming out soon and that kind of stuff. But interestingly enough, I'm both kind of passive about this type of thing, but also very active about this type of thing. And I'll explain both of those. I'm passive because, okay, it's another exploitation kit, another post-exploitation kit, all right? And really in my head, then I start making a table, and I'm like, all right, Metasploit, Cobalt Strike, Sliver, Brute Ratel, X22, so on and so forth. And I'm just like, okay, everyone gets their own little drop-downs of all the sort of special things that they do that are different from each other and stuff. If I remember correctly, X22, I think when you purchase a subscription or whatever to it, you kind of get a VPS, you get a virtual private server that acts as your kind of hop to point, or your jump point, if you will. It's hosted in the country of your choosing or the country of your operation and things like that. So it's all sorts of like, okay, so you've commoditized like me building a DigitalOcean instance wherever I need it to be and stuff. Great, right? But what I would recommend for some of our defenders who are out there is, when you think about the differences between post-exploitation kits, you've got to think about them as funnels in a way. And what I mean by that is the things that post-exploitation kits do at the initial part of an intrusion or at the onset is likely their biggest differentiator, because the further I go down into an intrusion, right, I can go from, I don't know how many VPSs there are in the world. There's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of virtual server provider. Sorry, virtual. That's the word I'm looking for here. Virtual private server companies that are out there. So I'm not going to write a detection rule to say, well, if it comes from any VPS that's out there, it's bad, right? Because that's just not going to work, because I can go build a legitimate company on top of a VPS as well, and now you've blocked me out. But what I would recommend maybe going the other route is saying is, okay, where do I have the crossover of exploit kits? And it usually gets down to the earlier detection stages, which is kind of that the actual post-exploitation stuff, credential harvesting, escalation of privileges, lateral movement, on disk, on system activities, and things like that. Now, I'm not saying wait until then. By all means, the earlier we can detect, the better. But everything I've read about X22 does a great job of talking about their hosted and external and C2 capabilities. But then the more I read about it and things like that, it's like, when you're using X22, and I'm reading right from the blog right now, you can choose which UAC bypass method to use based on the payload and the operating system. Well, folks, the number of UAC bypass methods out there are not infinite. Right? There's only a limited number, and even still, they have a limited number inside of their app or inside of the kind of the selection screen. So my thoughts on it are, I love when we get new development. I love when threat actors build out these massive exploitation frameworks, because they give us amazing research opportunities. I love getting these PCAPs in and seeing what the traffic looks like and highlighting some of the differences. But I go the other route and I say, okay, so you gave me a fancy way to bypass UAC. All right. Well, guess what I'm looking for on my systems, right? Guess what kind of detections I'm looking for.
I was going to say, you can use
like
their
that.
marketing material to go get an idea of the different tactics they're using.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, now I will say, that is the pure detection perspective, right? Let's go to the business side, because we've talked a lot about how threat actors set up businesses on today's session. And X22 does have an affiliate program set up, which is interesting. Affiliates take on the risk of responsibility, take on the risk and responsibility of promoting and distributing the malware, which means the original developers can kind of hide behind the scenes and that kind of stuff and just let their affiliates pass it out for them. Affiliates are paid a percentage of profits made from distributing the malware, and there's a whole chart that pulls out how the affiliate program works and everything like that. And I think it's a really interesting approach. That's where I think, we talked about this. We talked about access brokers a little bit earlier on and that kind of stuff. And again, it's going to feel very businessy, but it's very true. Where you can utilize your network, your connections, whether they're legitimate or not, where you can say, hey, I want you to be an affiliate for my post-exploitation kit. How would you feel about, telling others what the great things we do and that kind of stuff? It's a smart technique. It's a smart technique because it means you're dropping another shield between yourself and law enforcement and other authorities and things like that. So on that route, that is probably one of the most interesting parts about X22 is just the pure, I'm going to call it new wave style of business that they're doing. Normally malware kits don't have affiliate programs. And, again, I'll use my kind of rudimentary example from before. Hey, what do you have? I have I feel like the guy who's got the watches in the waistcoat, it's kind of like, look at all my fancy UAC bypass methods that I have right here and that kind of stuff. And you're like, oh, what makes you different from the others? Like, well, my friend over there can recommend me. And, anyways, without going too far down that road, I huge fan of seeing some of the novel ways that adversaries go through and kind of commoditize or create these different types of products, because again, it gives us that unique research perspective, and quite frankly, it opens up the field a little bit. Why should Cobalt Strike get all the spotlight? Maybe some of it should be shared by some of the others. So nonetheless, and let me just remind everyone too, I don't have anything against Cobalt Strike whatsoever, but it is a legitimate company that's out there. So for a while, if not still, one of the most popular post-exploitation kits out there was a cracked copy of a legitimate red teaming tool. So I think it was only natural that we would see the market come up with non-illegal versions of a post-exploitation kit and use those instead, just so that they didn't have to deal with license restrictions and stuff like that. And that's like hacking 101, which is subverting license restrictions or subverting installation keys. to get somewhere. And those are the old days of software pirating and things like that.
Awesome, Matt. This was a lot of fun again. I'm looking forward to more. And I definitely think I might have to go put together some content and explore what these dark markets look like. I think that would be interesting to kind of get a better sense of that picture.
It might be a good discussion for us
All
for
right.
the next one.
Okay, take care, sir.
Thanks, Chris. Take care.